Despite sunny image, Ronald Reagan's racism paved the way for Trump's. Editors note the opinions in this article are the author's, as published by our content partner, and do not necessarily represent the views of MSN or Microsoft. It takes a lifetime to build a good reputation, Will Rogers once said, but you can lose it in a minute. This certainly seems to be the case with former President Ronald Reagan, who served as California's governor from 1967 to 1975. Just a few awful. In the shocking conversation, first revealed by The Atlantic, Reagan refers to African delegates to the United Nations as monkeys and says they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes. Nixon guffaws, the two men, you won a governor of California, won a president from California. You were upset that the African delegates had voted to recognize the People's Republic of China. So, in President Donald Trump's increasingly racist rhetoric has stunned political observers, yet he's simply playing to a constituency that was cultivated over decades by people like Nixon and Reagan. They may have operated. While some political observers wish to cast Trump as an anomaly of history, the truth is that he's a logical heir to the bigoted lineage of his predecessors. In 1960, the Nixon campaign in 1968, and the Nixon White House after that, had two enemies: the anti-war left and black people, said former Nixon domestic policy chief John Ehrlichman in a 1994 interview with journalist Dan Baum. We knew we couldn't. Reagan's critics have long pointed out both the implicit and explicit racism in his statements and policies. If an individual wants to discriminate against Negroes or others in selling or renting his house, it is his right to do so, said Reagan during his 1966 campaign for governor. He crushed Pat Brown in a landslide. As president, he notoriously embraced South Africa's racist apartheid government. He also promoted, as New York Times columnist Paul Krugman recounted in his book Conscience of a Liberal, Reagan visited Philadelphia, Mississippi, in 1980 and declared, "I believe in states' rights." It was an obvious, yes, Reagan's racism was there all along, in plain sight, for everyone to see. Yet, Reagan died in 2004 and can no longer atone or apologize. Unfortunately, but it's never too late to set the record straight. Democrats and Republicans alike have often elevated Reagan as an example of political pragmatism and good old-fashioned American values. They harken back to, yet we must dispose of these comforting myths. Men like Nixon. In his official gubernatorial portrait, Reagan stands in front of the state capitol. The Sacramentos. Going forward, there's no honest way to remember him without acknowledging this shameful fact. Copyright 2019 The Sacramento Bee, Sacramento, California. Visit the Sacramento Bee, Sacramento, California. Distributed by
Raindrop, truck top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. I get fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.